Greetings, insane persons. It's Wednesday. I'm Kyle, and that means it's time for another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. I'm trying to mute my phone here. Wednesday Whimsy, of course, is a short show that I do every Wednesday evening where I talk about a board game topic, a top 10, or something else that happens to be coming beyond my mind, often board game related, usually, in fact. The last couple of weeks I was out of town, so I did do some pre-recording. I hope you were able to find those episodes. I hope you enjoyed them. Some were a little bit different, but hey, it's always fun to talk. Today, though, I'm excited to come back. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about a game called Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia. This was a He-Man themed game that came out by Simon, and basically it was just, a free-for-all, skirmishy type game with tons of fun, tons of theme. At that time, I mentioned that there's another game. So both at the same time, a game called Clash for Eternia came out. That's one we talked about already. And another game called Fields of Eternia came out almost at exactly the same time. The difference is that the Fields of Eternia game was published by the company Archon Studio, and it was released only in certain countries in Europe. Now, I have always been a massive Masters of the Universe fan. I mean, He-Man was my childhood, basically. So I knew I needed to get the second game. Now, what I'm going to do this time, because there's a lot to talk about, and I don't want to go long, and I want to make sure I give each game its time, I'm not going to compare the European game. I've got it here. This is Masters of the Universe Fields of Eternia. You can see that there. I'm not going to compare it with the Simon game today. I will just take this one, isolate it, talk about it all by itself. It's good things, it's bad things. And then next week I'm going to come back and I will do a comparison of the two, sort of to show what works, what doesn't, that kind of thing. Obviously, if you watched the last one, I will give my final rating on this one as well, so you'll be able to tell which one I liked better, but the comparison might still have some value for you. Anyway, so with that out of the way, let's get into talking about it. So, what is this game about? Well, just basically, you take characters from the Masters of the Universe series, and you take them into a scenario, and they run around and they do various things to get points. And your opponent will be playing a different faction. The game comes with, if you get all the expansions, there's 4 factions. You've got the Masters of the Universe, which, contrary to the first episode of He-Man, means the heroes. You have the Evil Warriors, that's Skeletor and his crew. You've got the Snake Men, led by King Hiss, and you've got the Evil Horde, led by Hordak. And they're all going to kind of go at it. Now, you'll only ever play with 2 or 3 of those. I don't think it's possible under the rules to play with all 4 factions at once. But essentially, each side will take. There will always be 6 heroes if you play with only 2 factions. Each side will have 3, and if you play with 3 factions, each side will have 2. And basically, there's a story or a scenario. There's a book, several books with scenarios. You'll set it up. It'll tell you some special rules. There's usually a separate deck of cards that goes with each scenario. So you're going to be going through a different story depending on which scenario you're trying to play. Now, there's also a cooperative and or solo version of the game, which I think all use kind of the same scenario, but, the same deck of cards. There's different scenarios they go through. And then there's what the game calls skirmish scenarios, which are going to be sort of smaller, faster games, ideally, but not really as story-based. Anyway, but really the game is trying to evoke stories from the Masters of the Universe history, canon, whatever you want. I mean, ultimately, remember, these games, the TV show was made to sell children's toys, so the stories weren't always that deep, but there were these comic books that came out, and some of the later iterations of the series have added a bit more story. So ultimately, that's what you're trying to do. So how does the game work? Now, I would love to show you pictures here. The problem is that there really aren't very many. Because this game came out only in about 10 countries in Europe, there haven't really been a lot of reviews or pictures taken of it. I'll show you just sort of one that I have found, I almost wanted to take some of my own, but I didn't end up having enough time. But basically, you'll see there's this huge map, and it's covered in minis here because, of course, that's what's fun. But you'll see there are all these little areas here. And these areas are called outposts, and then there are these little in-between areas called wilds. And there are these paths, these sort of textured-looking paths that might connect outposts, and those are adjacent, which allows you to do some slightly different things with it. But on your turn, you're going to have two actions. There's a list of actions. There's no player aid. Talk about that later, but there's basically three different ways to move. And then you can also have essentially an event, or you can place these sort of neutral or these mindless soldier minion type people on the map. And that's or move them around. Ultimately, those are kind of the things you're going to choose from. Now, you can only choose each action once, which means, of course, if you choose to move for one of your actions, you've got to do something else or find a different way to move for your second action. Again, we'll talk about how that works in the game a little bit later. But what you're trying to do is you also have 3 victory cards, well, or 2 if you're playing only 2 heroes. And these will give you certain goals like cast 4 magic spells, or have 4 events, or some sort of task you're trying to do. If you do it, you play the card face up, you get a certain point value, and then there's a subtask that you can then attempt to accomplish for additional points. And you're also going to be getting points by killing enemy heroes in battle, or winning battle against epic beasts, legendary beasts, something like that, and other ways as described by the scenario. Really, a lot of the game comes down to 2 major types of situations. The first is going to be these events. So there's 2 event decks. One is called the Wilds deck, and in there are going to be minor events or minor battles against sort of a fairly simple type of an enemy. I guess I should start by saying there are 3 kinds of combat in this game. So if you're doing combat against one of these event cards, sort of these low-level event cards, you're going to use dice, and the card is going to have some stats, and you're going to roll the dice, and it'll have either a blank on it, or a double success, the crossed swords, or a single success, the single sword, or a reroll, which lets you obviously reroll that die, and one other if you'd like. And you're going to be assigning these dice to the different stats on the card. There's an armor stat. You've got a fully assigned dice to cancel that, and then you're going to assign it to its life. And if you are able to do that, you're going to beat the monster. But if you don't, the monster might hit you back, and so you can also assign the dice to the monster's attack to reduce the damage you're going to be taking. If you beat the monster, there's going to be, or minion, or whatever it happens to be, there's going to be some type of reward. Oftentimes, you can pay the game's currency, which it refers to as Eternia, which are these fairly generic-looking coins that just have an E on them. You can pay that to tame the beast and make it sort of add some of its stats to you, maybe give you a special ability. You can also, usually, if you win something, there's going to be a bonus, and that's really going to be a card that you add to your combat deck. Combat deck, you say? Well, that's going to sort of feed into the second type of combat, which is what's known as epic combat. I really wish I had a picture here that I could show. Maybe I can find one if I'm quick while I'm talking about it. But basically, each faction is going to have a 41 or 21 card deck, and that deck is made up of some combination. Just a lot of pictures of the minis, unfortunately. Some combination of special cards or cards that add +1, +2, or +3 to your battle. You're going to, well, you can see some of them there. Anyway, I'm going to stop looking. And I might actually turn this off for now because I don't know that there'll be that much else to show. But basically, you're going to be drawing one card from your deck and playing, and you've got 3 stats. You've got you've got an attack row, you've got the board you're playing to. An attack row, a defense row, and an initiative row. So you will draw a card. You'll look at it. You'll play it usually face down unless it's a special card. Everyone's going to draw 4 cards and play 4 cards. There's an ability some cards will let you draw more than one and choose or discard a card, but ultimately draw 4 cards, play 4 cards, and then reveal them and see what happens. And you'll see who wins the initiative. That person will do all their damage reduced by their opponent's armor, and then if the opponent is still alive, the opponent can do their damage back reduced by the other player's armor. So lots of the rewards are going to allow you to add a +2 or a +3 or another special card to your deck. So you take one from this big stack, you add it to your deck, and then you choose another card to remove, although that card is always a +1. I mean, you're never going to remove something other than a +1 unless, for whatever reason, you run out of them already. It's kind of a false choice. But that's the epic combat. You'll do that against other heroes, and you'll do it against epic beasts. The epic beasts are basically like, they just sort of have their stats predetermined, so you can kind of see what they're going to be getting. Anyway, and then the third kind of combat is with those little minion soldiers, and that's just a determinative combat. If they move into a space with another player, they do direct damage to that character. And if they move into a place with other soldiers, they just sort of eliminate each other, knock each other out on a 1-1 basis. So that's kind of the way combat works. So on your turn, usually you're going to move, and often you'll either have an event, or you might place soldiers in a space that you happen to be in so that you can control it, because after all the heroes have activated, you move to a next round, and on every other round, you're going to get income based upon the spaces you control. And that's kind of how it works, right? I mean, it's a little bit of a mess to describe, but really it's about preparing that little deck to kind of help you be ready for combat. And it's about trying to have events from these 2 decks, the sort of story deck and the wilds deck, that are going to help you to get points. Obviously, that's going to be a bit random. And then you also have your separate goals. You do that, you play, I don't know, I think it's 12 rounds of the game. And then the game is over. Sometimes it could end early due to some sort of an event, but ultimately that's normally what you'll do is 12 rounds. Then whoever has the most points, that person wins. So what makes the game special? The first thing that makes the game special is they've really tried to put some story in here. I said I was not going to talk about the other game, but the other game doesn't have as much story. This one, there's at least a narrative that you're going through, and many of the events are kind of trying to give you some sort of moral choice or to drive some sort of story forward. So that's really nice. Also, the models we saw when we looked at the pictures there, and we can look at them again, they do not come painted like in this picture. They come very plain. I don't even remember getting a green tiger model. But you've got, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But the figures are very nice. They're generally single color. So all the horde are red. All of the evil warriors are purple. All of the heroic people are white. And all of the snake men are green. I can't see that right now, but obviously if you wanted to paint them, then they would look different. But there's sort of a lot of detail. They're really good quality models. I like that they're different colors, which helps you to differentiate which team you happen to be dealing with at the time. Generally well made. The board is bright and colorful. I will say that. It is unfortunate if you're kind of a purist, because they've kind of crammed the horde onto the Eternia map, and obviously the horde was throughout the series really more of a villain and a villainous force in the She-Ra series, which was on Etheria, a different planet. I mean, there's some history, but I don't know that it makes a lot of sense to have this whole section of the map devoted to the horde since they were off-world. Also, She-Ra is a main sort of core box hero, so and the horde doesn't even come in the core box. But there's at least an attempt to get us to a point where we've got some thematic tie-ins, trying to throw things in that'll be enjoyable. There you can kind of see, I guess, the back of the box, but kind of see what we've got there, although I don't think the characters are yellow. But hey, that's not important. That must be a mock-up. Anyway, so there's some good attempts at story. The models are nice. The board is brightly colored. It's nice to have a map of Eternia, although, take it with a grain of salt. And the idea of the game is intended to be fairly simple. You're just trying to get points. And whoever has the most wins. That's something that's very easy to understand. So where's the but? There's a lot of but here. First of all, and this is not something I can really fault the game with, there is this amazing Castle Grayskull dice tower. I mean, that was the showpiece from the from the Kickstarter or GameFound or whatever it was. I will say the side of the box says this is easy to assemble, and that is what is known as an absolute lie. This thing was a nightmare. I have rarely had an assembly issue. First of all, it didn't come with any instructions, and secondly, it just was so difficult to put together. At least I found it difficult to put together. So there's that. Everything else in the game comes pre-assembled, so I'm not going to ding it for the Castle Grayskull Dice Tower, although that's the coolest thing ever, and it's a little bit disappointing, the way that it came in pieces and was difficult to put together. So where's the other but? And this is really the game. I guess I have to ding it on this. The game just isn't very much fun. I said that, first of all, it tried to inject theme, but it really kind of fails. I mean, I have here a couple of the heroes, right? We've got Tila here and He-Man, and you'll see, there's these combat things here, right? At the start of combat, you'll select which weapon you're going to use, and it gives you a special ability, which you don't get to use unless one particular card in your deck of 21 comes up. Secondly, He-Man here, you'll see he has a sword ability and a magic ability. I mean, it's an energy blast. I don't know that I remember He-Man ever doing energy blasts. He mostly just had the sword, and then he was a run up and smash things kind of guy. And then Tila also. I mean, her staff here is listed as a magic weapon, but it really wasn't. So, I mean, the theme kind of falls apart because they try and shove some game mechanics on it, mechanisms on it. Sorry. Also, the stats for the different heroes feel really the same. They all have a special ability, but it's not a really great special ability ever. It often is something you'd forget about. But the biggest problem in the game is that it is so slow. So I mentioned there's this enormous map, and you're only able to do 2 actions on a turn. You can only do each action once, which means you can only move you only move once per turn. Almost all of the characters out of the box have a movement value of 1, which means now you can buy a vehicle, right? You can buy a vehicle for them where you can randomly draw a beast that you can tame that you can get extra movement from. So, okay, so your first turn, you move 1 space. So you don't start in a space where you can buy anything. Those are all 2 or 3 spaces away. So for the first third of the game, or fourth of the game, first quarter of the game, you're moving very slowly to a shop where you'll be able to afford 1 upgrade for one of your heroes. Or you're drawing and hoping that you get something that you can ride, but if you are unlucky there and you just get a merchant who doesn't want to sell his eggs and you have a choice to buy them anyway and threaten him or to let him go and get 2 money. I mean, it can feel really unfair if one person is getting all these good or at least useful events and all you're getting is random crap. So, you're either going to slog your way to a place where you can buy something and finally upgrade, and then you can finally move 2 spaces on a turn, or you're just going to sit there and try and draw off the deck. I cannot tell you how not fun that is. It's just agonizing. Also, this map is huge. Everything you need to get to is really far away. And so, you might spend the first third of the game getting to somewhere where you can actually do something. And then, if you die in battle, you go all the way back to start and you lose stuff, right? You either lose 5 money or you lose equipment that's valued at 5 money. So that means you essentially do a hard reset and are sent back to start. And, the game can be really very swingy in that way. When I played I played my first time. I was in Liverpool, at Eurovision. I had it because I picked it up on the way. We played it, and the end game score was something like 24-6 because I just got really lucky. I got all of the good events. I got all of the animals and beasts. I got, the upgrades happened to be the ones that I could use or afford. And Victor, who I played with, he got nothing and he kept losing in battle and having to go all the way back to start and throw all his equipment away. I mean, it just sucked. It wasn't fun for me winning. It wasn't fun for him losing. And the funniest thing was the final event of that scenario we played was it said, if one player is winning by 1 point, or if the players are tied, trigger this event. And I mean, I laughed out loud because by that point I had 20 more points. Well, not 20. I had nearly 20 more points more than he did. There was no way he could catch up. And the last, round or two of the game was just needless. Also, I mentioned that kind of card upgrade system for the battle. That's nice. That sounds really fun. I guess I might put that into what makes it special. It's the kernel of a great combat system. But draw a card and play a card? I mean, that's not fun. It's not like I have a hand of 3 and I'm making a choice. No, it's draw a card and play a card unless I happen to have the ability to discard it and draw another one randomly off the top. And you're upgrading these things at kind of a similar pace, so it's not, and the only thing you're ever going to be adding is a +3 or a +2 in place of a +1, and sure, that can make your battle better. But if the other player has been drawing similar events, which might not be the case, you're both going to have the same decks by the time you get into a fight. And then it's just who happened to be luckier. I mean, sure, there's this sort of outthink moment where you're thinking, okay, is he going to play on initiative? Yeah, I see he played a card on initiative. Is it a 1? Is it a 3? How am I going to go about this? But ultimately, even that combat, which was supposed to be the sort of strategic hook of the game, it fell flat. It was the most fun part of the game, and it wasn't very much fun. Also, if you want to if 3 kinds of combat in a game is ridiculous, right? I mean, you don't need 3 different combat systems. That just makes the game harder to explain. And no player aid. I mentioned that we mentioned that earlier. No player aid. There's nothing to remind you of the 3 different types of movement and the 3 different types of combat. No, it's just, hey, it's your turn to do something. And but the 3 different kinds of combat, and then there's an alternate variant for both kinds where you can make it shorter, or the combat a little shorter, or you can bid your stuff out and then get a number of dice and roll those dice and use those to use the damage. I mean, if you want to make a game even swingier, you have it be draw 1 card, play 1 card, and then roll a die and see what happens. This game is just really so very disappointing. Now, I mentioned I'm not going to compare it to Clash of Eternia because I want to do I want to do a thoughtful comparison to kind of think about what that game did right and what this game did wrong. Because there's so much. Oh, rulebook. Forgot about that. Rulebook's awful. It's just terrible. It's all over the place. It's impossible to reference things. When you get into the solo rules, they don't explain about half of them. So a lot of it is just figure stuff out. And the solo part was also so random and so slow. It was just, this game is just agonizing. Every time I talk about it, I like it less. So Masters of the Universe Clash for Eternia, I guess let's go into final rating because I'm running out of time. I gave that one a 10, right? 10 out of 10. I was at a 9, but I talked myself into a 10. This game, I'm at a 5, and I'm going to talk myself into a 4. This game is just really, really bad. I do not recommend it. I went to great lengths to get a copy, and I almost wish I had not done so. I don't usually review games that I'm not excited about, and I was excited about this game, right? Whereas Clash for Eternia was the game I had wanted in my childhood, Fields of Eternia is an absolute and utter dud. I recommend, if you happen to be in Europe and are able to get a copy, don't. If you are in the U.S. and you love, or you just need to have it, really think about it. Really think about it again, because it's just so bad. There is, other than the attempt to inject theme and the IP that I'll tell you I love, this game, it just sucks. So there you go. That's my final rating, 4 out of 10. Um, so let's talk a little bit about next time. Like I mentioned, we are going to be talking specifically about the design points. It might be a different style of discussion than I usually do, but it's going to be the design points of what this game does wrong and what Clash for Eternia does well. And I hope that'll be a fun discussion. I'm looking forward to having it. I mean, it's obvious that I like one better than the other. You're not going to figure that out from watching the next episode. I just let that cat out of the bag, or that battle cat out of the bag. Missed that opportunity. But we're going to talk about that. It'll hopefully be instructive. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. I hope maybe I saved some completionist in the U.S. from spending lots of money and bothering a friend to receive a package for him and then having to go pick it up. This one, it's a stinker. Avoid it. Anyway, that's all for this week. So I'm going to wish you safe travels and courage when you need it, and I will be back in another week on next Wednesday for another exciting episode of Wednesday Whimsy. I'll see you then. Bye bye.